Couple of bookkeeping things seriously though before we get started. Obviously besides your workbook due tomorrow and your 10 days of wet clay left, we have Friday. You guys know Friday's a Thursday schedule, right? We all are aware of that? Okay. We have D-lunch on Friday. They got rid of A-lunch because we had that pepper rally, so they got D-lunch, just so you guys know. So be prepared, that's a little later in the day. All right, so today we're gonna wrap up our different pots. We're gonna do a critique, okay? We're gonna do a critique activity. Basically what I'm asking you to do is use vocabulary that we've learned, which is obviously the elements and principles that we've been talking about, as well as the forms that we talked about when we discussed at the beginning of the project, shoulder, whip, things of that nature. And we're gonna do a critique on these pots. I want to start by telling you guys always, critique can be a difficult activity. Somebody might say something critical about your work. Keep in mind, it's acceptable to say something that is not necessarily, that is constructive criticism, but we got to make sure we formulate it in a way that is constructive. Don't just say that you don't like something because you don't like it. If you have a reasoning behind it that ties into vocabulary, like, the form maybe is uneven or something along those lines, that would be a much better way to go about it. It will be a lot easier to digest it, okay? So, real quick warm up here before we get started. I'm going to hold up a couple pots. I'm going to ask you a couple things about them. Just show me a basic show of hands on which one you like more, okay? So, we'll start with a really, really basic question. I got two pots, pot number one, pot number two, okay? Just show me, when I show of hands, I'm going to say which one do you think was more successful in meeting the criteria of the lesson, okay? So this is pot number one, and this is pot number two. So raise your hand if you think pot number one was more successful than pot number two. Thanks. Raise your hand if you think pot number two is more successful. Good. I'm glad that turned out the way it did, because one of the things I was trying to show you was that there's a certain amount of personal interpretation to this. We're talking about opinion, and so it doesn't necessarily mean there's a right or wrong answer, as long as you have ideas and facts to back up what we're talking about, okay? So now let's talk more specifically about some of the functional things that we discussed earlier. So, talking about shoulders, specifically the shoulder of the pot. Is pot number one or pot number two? Who thinks pot number one has a stronger shoulder? Nice, hands down. Who thinks pot number two's got a stronger shoulder? Okay, again, good. We have a divided group. That's good. I'm going to demo what I want you to do in a second. So, let's talk about, from an exterior design standpoint, from an actual design implementation standpoint, which one do you think is better? Pot number one? Raise your hand if you think pot number one's better. Pot number two. Okay, good. So basically the activity, this is just a little warm-up. You're basically doing in your head what we already want you to do, which is to make judgments about what was successful in pottery. What I'm going to have you do here is we have, as you can see, we've got pots all around the room. I want you to go and break off, and you can either work in a group or you can work by yourself. And I want you to critique these pots. I want you to make comparing statements about them, and I'll demo that what I want in a second. As I say, you work in a group, you can work by yourself. Everybody must share out by themselves. In 10 minutes, we're going to come back together, and you can either choose to share out verbally, or you can write your response and turn it into me at the end of the hour. Your choice. I would encourage you to actually handle the pottery. It might be a little bit easier to make judgments on the smoothness of a pot if you pick it up and actually feel the exterior of the pot. You'll be able to feel the bumps. That way you can kind of better discern whether it's successful. It might also be a good idea to kind of take a couple of them, line them up in order of increasing order of success. I know that's something I do when I work on my master's work. When I look at it in the semester, I like to line it up. I think this is more successful than that in terms of handle or something along those lines. But visually lining them up, it's a little bit easier to make those decisions. So I encourage you to do either one of those things if it will help you come to your conclusion. When we're done with that, we're going to come back in, we're going to share out in 10 minutes. We're going to break back out after our share out, and you're going to grab your own pot, and I'm going to have you do a critique of that as well, keeping in mind the vocabulary that we talked about earlier. Okay, so I'll do a quick compare and contrast for you just to give you kind of an idea. I will use these two, they're very different, so I'll compare. This pot, to me, has more successful form, has a great shoulder, a lot more pronounced because of the way it goes in. It gives it more volume, as opposed to this one. Not that it's a poor form, but the shoulder specifically of this pot is not as pronounced, and therefore the pot form is not as pleasing to me. Rim-wise, I also like this pot has, it's a lot even height, even thickness. We have an even circle on it. This one is not quite as even, and therefore lacks a little bit of success as well. From a design standpoint of decorative finish, I like the contrast. This has an equal amount of positive and negative colors and contrast, whereas this one tends to be a little more even, evenly gray. I know that's out of your control, but I still want you to make judgments on that. So overall, I think this is a more successful pot. You know, that's basically what I'm looking for from you. I want you to use the vocab that we talked about, elements and principles, and things of that nature. Okay? Questions? Anybody?
Nope.
Fantastic. Let's get at it. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let's go.
All right.
Very nice. Thank you.